We're recording.
Hello everyone, this is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul. I'm here with Millie and Rodney and my wife Diane Sullivan, Reverend Diane Sullivan Paul. And tonight we're going to study the Garden of Eden, paper 73, and that starts on page 821.1. And I was telling our group before we started recording that we did this paper in 2012, and it's out on Vimeo. It'll be in the same channel as this will be. So that there's one from 4 years ago. It's pretty interesting too. So we're going to redo it tonight. All right. And let's have Rodney. Would you like to say a prayer to get us started tonight? I mean. You're breaking up pretty bad, Rodney. Rodney, we can't understand what you're saying. Can you hear us? Yeah, you're breaking up real bad.
Reverberating. Yeah, and then it cuts out. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Now
now
we
we
can,
can. Yeah.
Okay.
We could hear your
Father, Heavenly Father, we're very thankful for this opportunity. We have to come together tonight to study this great revelation that's been handed to us, specifically what we studied tonight in the Garden of Eden. And we pray for insight into the meaning of what we're about to read, and that we can retain this information so we're better able to share it with others. In all things, your will be done. Amen.
Amen. Okay, the Garden of Eden. I think I'll start reading tonight. Paper 73, the Garden of Eden. The cultural decadence and spiritual poverty resulting from the Caligasto downfall and the consequent social confusion had little effect on the physical or biological status of the Urantia peoples. Organic evolution proceeded apace, quite regardless of the cultural and moral setback, which so swiftly followed the disaffection of Caligasto and Dalagaster. And there came a time in the planetary history almost 40,000 years ago when the life carriers on duty took note that from a purely biologic standpoint, the developmental process of the Urantia races was nearing its apex. The Melchizedek receivers, concurring in this opinion, readily agreed to join the life carriers in a petition to the Most Highs of Adentia asking that Urantia be inspected with a view to authorizing the dispatch of biologic uplifters, a material son and daughter. And if you ever watch Ancient Aliens, this is where 37,000 years ago they said we got a upgrade in our blood, basically in our DNA, and this is where it came from Adam and Eve, material sons and daughters. Now,
I'm catching something that apparently once a planet gets to its apex of development, that's when they ask for a petition for an Adam and Eve.
that's right, and they petition the Most Highs of Adentia. Now we know the Most Highs live on Adentia, which is what? Our constellation headquarters. Remember? Okay? So that's where they're petitioning these for. And the Melchizedek receivers, does anybody know what those are? Those are the ones that took over, right? After Dalagastia and Caligastia disaffected. So there were 12 Melchizedek receivers that came and took over the administration on the planet, and they stayed until Adam and Eve came, right?
Somehow I thought there was one. There are 12 of them?
There were 12 of them, that's right, the Melchizedek receivers.
I think at the conclusion of not the default of the material son and daughters, but just one Melchizedek stayed on the planet.
Yeah, when Adam and Eve got here, right.
After they got here.
After they got here, that's correct. But there were 12 in that 200,000 years, that period of time before they got here, right? And who else was here? Van and Abaddon, right? They had been here 200,000 years too, because Van was what was one of the 10, head of the 10 of the Caligastan 100, and Abaddon was one of the assistants, right? He was a human, and he was given the complement of the system circuit when he volunteered to get part of his plasm for the creation of the Caligastan 100. So him and Van survived on the tree of life for 200,000 years till Adam and Eve got here. You know. So to the people of the garden, they were preparing for them. They probably thought these guys were like gods, because Van was, of course, 8 foot tall. And Abaddon had lived 200,000 years, so they thought they were some sort of gods, right? All right, so, and that's where we are. Start up here. All right. Lily, would you take the next one?
Just lost the screen.
Oh, okay. There it is. Okay.
Yes, this request was addressed to the Most High's indenture because they had exercised direct jurisdiction over many of Urantia affairs ever since Caligasti's downfall and the temporary vacation of authority on Jerusalem.
Okay, we had talked about this before, right? What do they mean, the temporary vacation of authority on Jerusalem?
They took over because Caligastia defaulted.
That's true. That's Urantia. That's what happened for Urantia. The Most Highs took charge, right? Even though the Melchizedek receivers were the ones that were sent to take over the administration of the planet. But the vacation of authority on Jerusalem was because of the Lucifer rebellion, right? That's what they're calling about, the temporary vacation of authority on Jerusalem. Since Lucifer rebelled, there was a short period of time until the new system sovereign showed up, which was Lanaforge, and took over at that point. And then he took over the authority of Jerusalem. He took over the authority of our system, right, the local system. So that's what they're talking about here. Temporary vacation of authority. Let's try this here. All right. Rodney, would you take this one?
Sure. Is that Tabernacle?
That's right, Tabernacle.
Sovereign supervisor of the series of decimal or experimental forms came to inspect the planet and, after a survey of racial progress, duly recommended that Urantia be granted material sons. In a little less than 100 years from the time of this inspection, Adam and Eve, the material son and daughter of the local system, arrived and began the difficult task of attempting to untangle the confused affairs of the planet, retarded by rebellion and resting under the threat of spiritual isolation.
Okay. Tabernacle. Let me go back here. I hit the wrong button here. Okay. Tabernacle. He was a Avondoctor. He was a Phenolator. Okay. Do we know what a Phenolator is? Phenolator is what happens when you go all the way to the Father and you get to stand before God the Father, right? And the Avondoctors, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but that's the what we will become when we get to the Mansion Worlds and become Phenolators. Well, after the Mansion Worlds, when we become Phenolators. Avondoctor means those who can believe without seeing. And that's what we will be, because we have never seen anyone of the system administration on this planet. We have to have faith that they're there. So that's what they call the Avondoctors, those who believe without seeing. Okay? And this next little picture here is a picture of Tabernacle on his inspection of the planet. All right? That's what that is. All right. Let's go on. Sweetie, you think the next one?
One, the Nodites and the Ammonites.
Ammonites.
Ammonites, you know, this is what Lee corrected me on before.
That's right.
I knew I was gonna, so,
Really good, huh?
yeah. Ammonites.
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 Yeah, because they're the descendants of Amadon.
Uh-huh,
You know?
right. I know what they are, but I can't
Yeah.
pronounce them.
Yeah.
On a normal planet, the arrival of the material sun would ordinarily herald the approach of a great age of invention, material progress, and intellectual enlightenment. The post-Adamic era is a great scientific age of most worlds, but not so on Urantia. Though the planet was peopled by races physically fit, the tribes languished in the depths of savagery and moral stagnation.
Okay, that's because we didn't get enough of the Adamic blood, right? That would have heralded into the age of invention if everything would have gone as planned, right? Let's see what's going on here. All right. 10,000 years after the rebellion, practically all the gains of the prince's administration had been effaced. The races of the world were little better off than if this misguided son had never come to Urantia. Only among the Nodites and the Ammonites was there persistence of the traditions of Dalmatia and the culture of the planetary prince. Now, y'all remember that Nod was one of the rebellious Caligastan 100s, right? He was one of the 60 that rebelled. And he went upwards from the garden, from Dalmatian up to where the lake Nod was, and they basically inhabited most of Europe, okay, at that time. And these were the Caligastan 100, so these were huge human beings. They were giants, 8 foot tall, and they mated with the local people that were there. Basically, that had been at the Dalmatia and the barbarians. Okay, so their descendants are the Nodites. All right, so they came from the land they called Nod, right? Because it was named after Nod. All right, and in the Bible it talks about how Adam and Eve's son went and found a wife at Nod, right? Remember that?
Hey,
Yeah.
That was one of the hang-ups with the Bible, that Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, and Cain killed Abel and went off to the land of Nod.
That's right.
Well, the Bible doesn't say anything about anybody else. Who in the world was the land of Nod?
Yeah.
So this book was very helpful.
Yeah, it does. It tells you who they were, right? And it's interesting, here also it says, only among the Nodites and the Ammonites, we know who Amadon was. He was Van's associate, and they were faithful. They had possession of the tree of life. It says, was the persistence of the traditions of Dalmatia and the culture of the planetary prince. So basically, Van and Amadon tried to keep the traditions of Dalmatian alive until the arrival of Adam and Eve, and they could only do so much because it was a very small group of people.
And they were preparing the Garden of Eden.
They were preparing the Garden of Eden, and most of them were what? Women, right? That were the associates of Amadon. So, and they were faithful. The women were faithful. All right.
Roger,
Yeah.
I have a note here that it's 450,000 years between the planetary prince and Adam and Eve.
Okay, well that was the arrival of the planetary prince, Rodney. He was faithful for 250,000 years, okay, Caligastan. So the Caligastan 100 and Caligastan and Dalagastan were faithful for the first 250,000 years. The next then the rebellion took place. So the next 200,000 years, that's when the rebellion took place. So it was 200,000 years between the rebellion and the arrival of Adam and Eve. So you're correct, it was 450,000 years when they arrived, but it was 200,000 after the rebellion that Adam and Eve came.
how much time went by before Adam and Eve arrived that they worked on the garden? I wonder.
They worked on the garden 100, I think it was 100 years before they arrived.
100 years, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
That's,
because,
it was 100 years before they got here, so.
yeah,
They
they built two walls, a 40-foot wall and I think it was an 8-foot wall around the garden. And in between the two walls, I think it was 8 foot, I could be wrong on that one. But in between the two walls is where they kept all the animals and stuff. No animals were allowed on the inside of the garden. Okay, just on the outside of the 40-foot wall.
And the tree of life came here when Adam.
The tree of life was brought by the Melchizedeks to Dalmatia, right? And the idea,
1,000 years before.
450,000 years before, that's correct. And the tree of life was meant to keep the Dalmatians, or the Caligastia 100, alive indefinitely also, because they were in the system circuit, right? And that tree of life was supposed to be passed down to Adam and Eve. Okay, the tree of life was brought to the planet by the Melchizedeks. And there's some question, we don't know exactly how the tree of life got here, because we know most beings are transported by seraphic transport. We know that they don't have bodies because they would burn up because of the intensive speed of the transporters, right? So the big question is, how did the tree of life come with the Melchizedeks? Did they come in a spaceship? You know, it's possible. They could have come as seeds with them. We're not really sure. But all we know is that the tree of life was brought to Dalmatia first, and that's what the Caligastia 100 stayed alive on until they defected. And then at that point, Van and Abaddon took, along with one of the loyal midwayers and the guardian angel, took charge of the tree of life, and then they took it where they went. Okay, so kind of interesting. But we're not sure exactly how it got here, other than the fact it does say that it was brought by the Melchizedeks. So,
Interesting.
yeah. Okay. Who's up? Did you just read that? I think Millie's up.
I think it's Millie's turn.
Huh?
I think it's Millie's turn.
Okay, I think so.
Okay, I got it. The Nodites were the descendants of the rebel members of the prince's staff, their name deriving from their first leader, Nod, one-time chairman of the Dalmatia Commission on Industry and Trade. The Ammonites were descendants of those Andonites who chose to remain loyal with Van and Amadon. Ammonite is more of a cultural and religious designation than a racial term. Racially considered, the Ammonites were essentially Andonites. Nodite is both a cultural and racial term, for the Nodites themselves constituted the 8th race of Urantia.
Now, why were they the 8th race? Because they were a race of beings derived from the Caligastia 100, right? They were not supposed to be here as a race, right? Okay. Something very important here is the Andonites. You can't confuse Andonites with Ammodonite. Okay, Andonites were the descendants of Andon and Fonda, right? They were their children's 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 children, right? That was the Andonites. And they were what we considered as Ammonites, because they were in the Dalmatia and they followed Van and Amadon and were loyal. Does that make sense? Remember Amadon, Andon and Fonta, the first two humans, were their descendants were Andonites. Okay? And those descendants ended up becoming the Ammonites because they were faithful. Okay? It's a little confusing. That's what they're trying to explain.
Very confusing.
Yeah, the difference between the terms. Okay. I got lots of pictures. tonight here on this little thing. This is the world of the Nodites, okay? And if you look here, you see the Persian Gulf, you see the Mediterranean Sea, Egypt down there, and the Caspian Sea, and you see Lake Van up there. You remember I was talking about Van and Amadon? That's basically where they hid out until the arrival of Adam and Eve. And if you look way over here, close to where it says Syria, okay, in the Mediterranean Sea, that is basically the location where they believe the second garden was. The first being down here at the tip of the Persian Gulf, okay? And here to the east is Dilmun, and that's what they consider the land of Nod, okay? And Mesopotamia, you see the two rivers there, the Tigris and the Euphrates coming together. Right there where it says Sumner, that's where they believe Dalmatia was. You're going to see another picture of this too, it might be a little more clear. This is a large picture of the overall. I wish I had my clipper like I used to. Okay. Okay, this is a large picture. It'll stay up there. The area, what we're talking about here, as far as all this activity, is basically right here. See where it says Sicily and everything, Afghanistan and everything? There's the Caspian Sea. All this is in this area right here. It's a large picture of it. Now I'm going to show you a couple of pictures that's going to, there's another one, it's the whole world. That one, let me go back here. This one is the 6 Sangic races and the areas in which they came from. You can look at that at your leisure too. I can't the rest of it, we'll see a little bit later. Is it going to let me?
That landmass basically shows how the land is today.
Yeah.
It was not necessarily configured like that then, was it?
No, it wasn't. But that gives us a reference of where everything was. I'm sorry, y'all, with this mouse and having fixed this today. Okay.
My turn.
Your turn.
There existed a traditional enmity between the Nodites and the Ammonites. This feud was constantly coming to the surface whenever the offspring of these two groups would try to engage in some common enterprise. Even later, in the affairs of Eden, it was exceedingly difficult for them to work together. And
What do you think this was? Because the Nodites followed the ones in the rebellion, right? And the Ammonites were the ones that stayed loyal. Okay, so there was tension between them all the time, right?
Shortly after the destruction of Dalmatia, the followers of Nod became divided into 3 major groups. The central group remained in the immediate vicinity of their original home near the headwaters of the Persian Gulf. The eastern group migrated to the highland regions of Elam, just east of the Euphrates Valley. The western group was situated on the northeastern Syrian shores of the Mediterranean and in adjacent territory.
Now with those maps you can trace down where all these areas are. That's why I put those maps in there.
Roger,
Yeah.
the map that you showed, was there ever an area that they considered where Dalmatia might be?
Yeah, you're going to see I'm going to show you a picture tonight of where they believe Dalmatia was.
Okay, it was near that area.
Yeah, it was near the very top part of the Persian Gulf where the Euphrates and the Tigris come together. That's what they believed was Dalmatia. Now, the second garden was in a totally different location, and I'll show you that too. All these pictures are on our website too, but I've got pictures of all this here tonight too. All right. The Nodites had freely mated with the Sangic races and had left behind a able progeny, and some of the descendants of the rebellious Dalmatians subsequently joined Van and his loyal followers in the lands north of Mesopotamia, here in the vicinity of Lake Van, which we saw on the map, right? I pointed out Lake Van. And the southern Caspian Sea region. The Nodites mingled and mixed with the Ammonites, and they were numbered among the mighty men of old because they were considered special because of their heritage, right? Okay, and this is another picture of Mesopotamia. This is a contemporary map of Iraq and its area. And you see this right here? This is Cyprus. It's got an Italian name on it. But just to the east of Cyprus, in this area right here, is where the second garden is thought to have been. And we're going to see a real nice picture of this in a minute. Now down here is where Dalmatia was considered, right here, where Bashra and Awaz and Kuwait is right now.
Okay, I thought that the first garden is up where you said the second one.
I'm sorry?
Where was the first garden?
That was the first garden.
Oh, okay, where was the second garden?
I think I got a map on that too, Rodney. We'll wait till we get to those maps.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Okay. But I just wanted y'all to get a feeling for all this. This is Lake Van up here again, right? And this is the modern map, right? This is the area where Dalmatia would have been. Actually, Dalmatia was here where the water is, because Dalmatia sunk into the Caspian Sea. I mean the Persian Gulf. So it's gone. But it was this area down here, and the descendants of them went right on land here and basically stayed because it was a fertile area. And it flooded on and off and on and off. But what was Dalmatia is totally gone now. Now, the garden was up here. So that gives you an idea between the two. Okay. And this is another view of this. And this shows a good picture of the Persian Gulf down here, right? And Dalmatia being somewhere down in here, right, that sank. And right close to it is Ur. All these names that we see in the Old Testament and stuff, Babylon, Irma, Gish, and all these are right in this area where the Tigris and the Euphrates come together, because this is what they call the Fertile Crescent. It's very green, gets water all the time, so you could grow things here. And if you look up here, this is Cyprus. This is where the Garden of Eden was, right in here. And you're going to see a picture of that a little bit later here. Okay, who's that? I think,
I am.
yeah.
Prior to the arrival of Adam and Eve, these groups, the Nodites and Ammonites, were the most advanced and cultured races on earth.
And they would be, because they were just the descendants of these two groups, right? All right. I'll get into the nitty-gritty.
Number 2, planning for the garden. For almost 100 years prior to Tabernacle's inspection, Dan and his associates, from their highland headquarters of world ethic and culture, had been preaching the advent of a promise of God, a racial uplift, a teacher of truth, and the worthy successor of the traitor Melchizedek. Though the majority of the world's inhabitants of those days exhibited little or no interest in such fiction, those who were in immediate contact with the Amazon accepted each seriously and began to plan the actual reception of the promise itself.
And I'm going to show you something a little bit later where there's a possibility of where this headquarters may have been. Okay, and it's gotten a lot of press lately because they dug up these huge monolithic type things that have animals on it and that sort of thing. So it's possible that they were arranged in this concentric circles. So it's possible this could have been where Van and Amadon in this highland area lived until then. So, all right.
Van told his nearest associates the story of the material sons on Jerusalem, what he had known of them before ever he came to Urantia. He well knew that these Adamic sons always lived in simple but charming garden homes and proposed 83 years before the arrival of Adam and Eve that they devote themselves to the proclamation of their advent and to the preparation of a garden home for their reception.
So it was actually 83 years, Rodney, they started preparing this. Just computers a little. Okay. From their Highland headquarters and from 61 far scattered settlements, Van and Amadon recruited a corps of over 3,000 willing, enthusiastic workers who in solemn assembly dedicated themselves to the mission of preparing for the promised, at least expected son. Now think about this. They were able to get 3,000 workers from 64 different settlements to come in and dedicate their lives for almost 100 years, building this garden for this promised son and daughter that was to come, that they would probably not live to see, right? Because back then they didn't live that long, you know. So that's a pretty deep commitment to do that, and to get 3,000 people to do that is just, to me, it's amazing. Yeah.
Well, the work it would take just to feed them and, you know, to take care of their lives while they're working.
I know. I'm just amazed all the way around. Let's see how this. Because I can't even get more than 2 people to a meeting, and they're able to get 3,000 to go out and work. So I'm skipping over some. Okay, here we go. Who's next?
Van divided his volunteers into 100 companies with a captain over each and an associate who served on his personal staff as a liaison officer, keeping Amadon as his own associate. These commissions all began in earnest. Their preliminary work and the committee on location for the garden sallied forth in search of an ideal spot.
So he basically administrated this and sent out workers looking for the perfect spot for the garden. All right, Rodney.
Although Caligastia and Valagastia had been deprived of much of their power for evil, they did everything possible to frustrate and hamper the work of preparing the garden. But their evil machinations were largely offset by the faithful activities of almost 10,000 men and midday preachers who so tireless labor to advance the enterprise.
So there were Caligastia and Delagastia tried to cause trouble all the time, right? While they were preparing the garden. And these 10,000 midwayers tried to act as guardians of the garden, really, you know, while they were doing this. And of course, these 10,000 midwayers were not visible to the inhabitants, right? But who could see them? Van and Amadon, right? So they knew they were there, right? But they were the only 2 that would be able to visualize them. I'm sorry, y'all. Every time I hit the button here, it goes over too slow. Okay.
3. The garden site. The committee on location was absent for almost 3 years. It reported favorably concerning 3 possible locations. The first was an island in the Persian Gulf. The second, the river location subsequently occupied as the second garden. Third, a long, narrow peninsula, almost an island, projecting westward from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea.
Okay, did you see that? Did you read that? The third one? Okay, let's, I'm way off base on this one.
You have a map that shows that?
Yes, I do. We will see that. Okay, I want to go back one slide here and bring something out, and then we're going to talk about this one. Notice here it says, the third, a long, narrow peninsula, almost an island, projecting westward from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, right? We're going to see exactly where this is, okay? Who's next?
You.
The committee almost unanimously favored this third selection. This site was chosen, and 2 years were occupied in transferring the world's cultural headquarters, including the Tree of Life. So the Tree of Life was moved from Van and Amadon's possession in the mountains to the new garden, right? Okay. But a single group of the peninsula dwellers peaceably vacated when Van and his company arrived. So there were inhabitants in this area, but they moved out when Van and Amadon arrived. They were probably afraid of them, you know, more likely. And this is a basically weaving. What's it called? Tapestry. A tapestry of the Tree of Life at the Ishtar Gate. It says here. Kind of interesting. We're going to see this location in just a minute here.
The Mediterranean Peninsula had a salubrious climate and an equitable temperature. The stabilized weather was due to the encircling mountains and to the fact that this area was virtually an island in an inland sea. While it rained copiously on the surrounding highlands, it seldom rained in Eden proper. But each night, from the extensive network of artificial irrigation channels, a mist would go up to refresh the vegetation of the garden.
What are they talking about? They're talking about the island of Cyprus, and you're going to see this in a minute here. You'll see exactly what they're talking about here. Rodney.
Okay. The coastline of this land was considerably elevated, and the neck connecting with the mainland was only 27 miles high at the narrowest point. The great river that watered the garden came down from the higher lands of the peninsula and flowed east through the peninsular neck to the mainland, and thence across the lowlands of Mesopotamia to the sea beyond. It was fed by 4 tributaries, which took origin in the coastal hills of the Aegean Peninsula, and there are the 4 heads of the river which went out of Eden, and which later became with the branches of the rivers surrounding the second part.
Okay. All right. Now, this is where they're talking about the first garden, right here. Okay? The second garden is considered down here, just above where Dalmatia would have been.
Okay.
Okay? See, it says first Garden of Eden, second garden. Okay? This first garden, there's a purple dot there, but it is covering up the island of Cyprus. Okay? And we're going to see a better picture of this in a second here. And here it is. And I want to go over this picture extensively, which we didn't do last time. And I want to do it this time because I want you to see where they think the possible garden is. You see this yellow line? I made this in 2012, this slide. Y'all probably don't even remember it. It's 4 years ago. And this is another imposition of this same picture, okay? The yellow is what's considered what they think the possible garden looked like. So see how cypress sits inside of it? This is the mountainous area they're talking about. And the neck, 27 miles wide, and this is where the wall was. This is the neck that connects the Garden of Eden with Syria, or the landmass. Okay, and you can see the neck up here too. You see this right here?
Yeah.
Okay, so all this outlined in yellow was the original garden. I put a yellow here because this was a huge lake. But if you take away the yellow, and there's a picture of this on our website without the yellow, you can see the indentation of where this sunk. It's just as obvious as the nose on your face. And this is before it sank here. This is after it sank. And so this is the island of Cyprus, and this is the Garden of Eden with the island of Cyprus there. Now, what's interesting is this. All sorts of legends came from this area. One of them, of course, was what?
Atlantis?
Atlantis. That's right.
Atlantis, I've seen that recently on history.
Yeah. Well, this is what they thought was the location of Atlantis. And if you go off this coast and dive in here, there's all sorts of ruins. Okay? And this ruins is possibly the ruins of quote, quote, Atlantis, or what? The Garden of Eden. Okay? So, my speculation is this. The legends of the garden, the first garden, probably passed down through times, and those became the legends of what? Atlantis. Right, because they were what? Advanced people. Right? And that's who was in the garden.
There was a Greek philosopher
Yeah.
who talked about this land
Yeah.
that he called Atlantis.
That's right.
And he said it was very advanced.
Very advanced. And that's what Dalmatia would have been to the people at that time. Right?
But this doesn't have the protection. It was like an island inside of an island.
Yeah, well that's what they're talking here about, Millie. After it sank, see it's an island. See the water surrounding it here?
Yes.
That's what
yes.
they're talking about, an island inside an island. The island inside the island, it would be Cyprus. But that was before it sank. Now after it sank, Cyprus became the island of itself, right? But the only way you could get to it was right here. And after it sank, the only way you could get to Cyprus was by ship, right? From here over to here. Now, interesting point, at 1100 AD, during the wars between the Muslims and the Christians trying to hold on to Jerusalem, they talk about how some of the warriors went from Cyprus over to the landmass. So Cyprus was still populated, right? And which makes all this really interesting. But without the yellow lines, I wish I would have put a picture. I don't know if I did or not. Without the yellow lines, it's on the website. There's one picture on the website. You can roll your mouse over, and when you roll your mouse over, the yellow line pops up. When you take it away, it pops away. But you can see the indentation perfectly of the Isle of Atlantis, or the Isle of the first garden. Okay? Is that
That's
interesting?
one of Cyprus.
Yeah. See, that's why this is
The bottom part, this little lake in the middle of the bottom.
right. This is what it would look like.
Yeah, this is what was on the History Channel when they talked about there was a break in it, and
Yeah.
that was a wonderful port. It
Yeah.
was totally protected. There was a way to go in and service the land that was inside, which they said was Atlantis, and we're now saying is Cyprus.
That's right.
But that was a
But
totally
this is-
protected port.
This is the totally protected port right here, Millie.
There's no break in it.
There's
Should
no
be-
well, this picture doesn't show a break in it, but there could have been a break right here. See?
Yes, yes, yes.
You see what I'm saying? This is
Yes,
these pictures are just speculation because of the way the land sank. You know, it could have had a channel going from here to here. See, this lake looks a little bit different than this here because this is the one I drew in. You know, because of the location. Okay, but it describes Atlantis perfectly. Really, kind of interesting though, isn't it? So now you know where I think you know where Atlantis and where the first garden was, right? Now, let's keep going. This is another picture of the same thing. You can see the lake again and the possible garden site. Okay. This is the Tigris and Euphrates, okay? And what I think is this. They talk about where the Tigris and Euphrates come together right before the Persian Gulf, okay? Persian Gulf's down in here. They talk about the highland home of Van and Abaddon, right? They stayed there, what, 200,000 years, right? And they had 64, basically, little locations where they were training the local people. And they're talking about this mountainous home. Look at this right here. What is this here? This is
Göbekli Tepe.
yeah. This is
We
mountainous
see that
area.
on the History Channel.
That's right. You can watch it on the History Channel.
It was inhabited.
That's right. Do you know what's around that? Concentric circles of blocks that has different animals and things like that that's been carved on it with a center place, and I'll bet you anything that was the Father's temple for man
Perhaps.
and Abaddon.
Yes, yes.
But they didn't have tools to do that back then.
Van and Abaddon had new technology they could do that with.
They had technology that we don't even know today.
That's right. So, that would be a perfect explanation of the ruins of this area right here. You know, it's funny how if you put the pieces together, you see these things on Ancient Aliens and shows like this, and they're big mysteries to them. And I watch it, and I just want to. Well, Diane sees me do it all the time. I scream at the TV or the wall here. It's our TV, but you know they need to read the Urantia book. The answers are right there. You know.
You could have gone to the conflagration that they had with all the UFO people.
That's
and
right.
explained it to them.
Yeah, yeah.
Last month, the end of October, I think it was.
There are so many explanations of these mysteries in the Urantia book, it's unreal. You know, it really is. But anyway, the second garden would be down in here too. I wanted to point that out. Okay, this is Göbekli Tepe, right? This is what we're talking about. Notice this is the Mediterranean Sea. This is Cyprus down in here. And they said they went east and into the mountains. Where would that be?
Yeah.
Right there.
Go back to Tepe.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's exactly right. And here's the Tigris and Euphrates coming together, right? Isn't that just interesting?
Very interesting. Very interesting.
All these are on our map. All right, this is another picture of it. Cyprus, okay, here. Okay, this is the Taurus Mountains. This is where Göbekli Tepe is. All right, now down in here where Lagash and all this is where they think the second garden is. Okay, the first garden being right in here, off at the tip of the Persian Gulf that sank. I mean, this is where Dalmatia, is, not the first garden. This is where they believe that Dalmatia was, right? Because this is exactly where they describe Dalmatia as being, okay, in the book. You just have to put two and two together. I think I got one or two more pictures than that. This is a little bit better map. You can see the Persian Gulf and right here. This would be
When people dive in the top of the Persian Gulf, do they find the remains of the city of Dalmatia?
Well, they dug up not Dalmatia because the city of Dalmatia would actually be part of the city that sank here in the Persian Gulf. Millie,
Do they find it when they dive?
I don't know. Millie, I really
They
don't.
dive everywhere looking for old ruins.
But it does say in the book somewhere, if I remember correctly, that one of these days explorers will go underwater and find the remains of the writings of Dalmatia and the circle of the Father's Temple, you know, that's still there. So anything's possible. My goal when I first started to scuba dive, my goal was to go here someday and dive. Never did make it. Got too old, too decrepit now. But that's what I'd like to have done, is gone to the Persian Gulf and actually dive and see if I could locate Dalmatia. It would be fun to go here to the tip of Cyprus and dive between the landmass and Cyprus and see if you could find the Garden of Eden, the remains of the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
But right here where you'd see this is where the second garden would be, in this area. Okay. Whew. Man, that was a lot of explaining, wasn't it?
Yeah. Diane, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
The mountains surrounding the garden abounded in precious stones and metals, though these received very little attention. The dominant idea was to be the glorification of horticulture and the exaltation of agriculture.
Okay. Well, I'm having all kinds of issues with this. Okay, here we go. The site chosen for the garden was probably the most beautiful spot of all of its kind in all the world. The climate was then ideal. Nowhere else was there a location which could have lent itself so perfectly to becoming such a paradise of botanic expression. In this rendezvous, the cream of the civilization of Urantia was foregathered. Without and beyond, the world lay in darkness, ignorance, and savagery. Eden was the one bright spot on Urantia. It was naturally a dream of loveliness, and it soon became a poem of exquisite and perfected landscape glory. And if you think about Cyprus, till today, it's beautiful. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous island, right?
Oh,
All right. Millie, I think you're up.
Have you been to Cyprus?
Never been there, Millie. I've never been overseas.
Me either. I've been close. I've been to Turkey, but I haven't been to Cyprus. Number 4, establishing the garden. When material sons, the biologic uplifters, began their sojourn on the evolutionary world, their place of abode is often called the Garden of Eden because it is characterized by the floral beauty and the botanic grandeur of Edentia, the constellation capital. Van well knew of these customs and accordingly provided that the entire peninsula be given over to the garden. Pasturage and animal husbandry was projected for the adjoining mainland. Of animal life, only the birds and the various domesticated species were to be found in the park. Van's instructions were that Eden was to be a garden, and only a garden. No animals were ever slaughtered within the precincts, and all flesh eaten by the garden workers throughout all the years of construction was brought in from the herds maintained under guard on the mainland.
So
Right, that's the connection.
that's
We're connected on the east side to the western shore of the land.
that's right. That's right. Make perfect sense?
Yes, it comes together for me.
Yeah. Okay. That's what we want. All right. Rodney.
Right.
yeah. The first task was the building of the brick wall across the peninsula. This once completed, the real work of landscape beautification and home building could proceed unhindered.
A zoological garden was created by the building by building a smaller wall just outside the main wall. The intervening space, occupied by all manner of wild beasts, served as an additional defense against hostile attacks. This menagerie was organized in 12 grand divisions, and wall paths led between these groups to the 12 gates of the garden, the river and its adjacent pastures occupying the central area.
Okay, so this must have been magnificent to see. We had this 40-foot wall and then a smaller wall, right? And the 40-foot wall were 12 gates where you could go into the garden itself, and of course they were guarded constantly, right? You can see, I mean, you can imagine this in your mind. In the preparation of the garden, only volunteer laborers were employed. No hirelings were ever used. They cultivated the garden and tended their herds for support. Contributions of food were also received from nearby believers, and this great enterprise was carried through to completion in spite of the difficulties attendant upon the confused status of the world during these troublous times. I mean, just the building of the garden is just an amazing feat to me.
Cool. It would have been cool.
Really?
We don't think about the garden as being walled and people couldn't come, the outside people couldn't come in.
No,
And there were
because
no animals. We think about the garden as everybody, the lion and the lamb laying down together.
yeah, that's because of the
That's not our mindset.
yeah, that's right. It's the Old Testament. It's the myth of the garden, right? Just like the myth of
Yeah.
Adam and Eve. You know, they believed that Adam and Eve was the first woman created out of clay because of the reconstitution of Adam and Eve in the Father's temple, right? And that's where the legend of Eve's rib coming from Adam came from, right? And that they were created from dust or clay, right? And every society down through history has this same legend in their history about men being created, man and woman being created from clay, right? And it all came from the garden. You know, these were myths that were passed down generation to generation. Kind of hard to pass down to one generation to another. You know, that Adam and Eve were brought in on a seraphic transport, you know, and just their souls, and they were stuck back in new bodies, you know. I mean, that's kind of hard to explain to a barbarian, you know. So, you know, and that's where these things came from. But that's all we knew up till the Urantia book, really, if you think about it. And all we knew was recorded in the Old Testament. And these stories, some of them came from Moses. And Moses never taught this story of the garden. He just taught the people a basic story of creation. Okay? But this is how things get started. And the actual creation story did not even get started until I think it was around 900 BC, before Christ, 900 years before Christ. This is where the actual creation story got started, even though creation of our planet started 1 million years before that, you know. All right.
Okay. But it was a cause for great disappointment when Van, not knowing how soon the expected son and daughter might come, suggested that the younger generation also be trained in the work of carrying on the enterprise in case their arrival should be delayed. This seemed like an admission of lack of faith on Van's part and made considerable trouble, caused many desertions, but Van went forward with his plan of preparedness, meantime filling the places of the deserters with younger volunteers.
So as people deserted, he just replaced them, right? That's pretty good faith, I'd say. I mean, the garden.
He was dependent on volunteers. I can sympathize with him. Volunteers are the hardest thing in the world to get.
That's right. That's right. Okay, 5.
Number
Rodney.
5, the Garden Home. At the center of the Gannett Peninsula was the exquisite stone temple of the Universal Father, the sacred shrine of the garden. To the north of the administrative headquarters was established. To the south were built the homes for workers and their families. To the west was provided the allotment of ground for the proposed schools of the educational system of the expected son. while in the eastern part of Eden were built the domiciles intended for the promised son and his immediate offspring. The architectural plans for Eden provided homes and abundant land for 1 million human beings.
And if you look at that area, that would be about the amount of space it would be required for about 1 million people, right? If you think about it. So if you think about it from the east of Cyprus, that area between Cyprus and the landmass, that's the area they're talking about of the domicile for the Father's temple. So it sank, it's still there probably. And the homes for Adam and Eve, and the land provided for his sons and daughters as they were supposed to have them, right? So,
When we look at it on a world map, it looks tiny,
yes,
but when you really take measurements, it's pretty big.
it's a pretty big landmass we're talking about, yeah. It's big enough for 1 million people. If you think Atlanta itself has got over 1 million people just around it. It's not near that big. So, okay.
At the time of Adam's arrival, though the garden was only 1/4 finished, it had thousands of miles of irrigation ditches and more than 12,000 miles of paved paths and roads. There were a trifle over 5,000 brick buildings in the various sectors, and the trees and plants were almost beyond number. 7 was the largest number of houses composing any one cluster in the park, and though the structures of the garden were simple, they were most artistic. The roads and paths were well built, and the landscaping was exquisite. That was on 1/4.
Yep, 1/4. The sanitary arrangements of the garden were far in advance of anything that had been attempted theretofore on Urantia. The drinking water of Edensha was kept wholesome by a strict observance of the sanitary regulations designed to conserve its purity. During these early times, much trouble came about from neglect of these rules, but Ban gradually impressed upon his associates of the importance of allowing nothing to fall on the water supply of the garden. Now think about this. The legends of Atlantis talk about an irrigation system, right, and a water system. Now, who do you think the Greeks modeled their systems or their cisterns, and the Romans took up the same exact policy? It came from the garden, right?
Obviously.
Yep. Okay, and we're going to talk about that there. Before the later establishment of a sewage disposal system, the Edenites practiced the scrupulous burial of all waste and decomposing materials. See this sewage disposal system? That's what I'm talking about. Amidon's inspectors made their rounds each day and searched for possible causes of sickness. Ranches did not awaken to the importance of the prevention of human diseases until the later times of the 19th and 20th centuries. Before the disruption of the Adamic regime, a covered brick conduit disposal system had been constructed, which ran beneath the walls and emptied into the River of Eden almost a mile beyond the outer or lesser wall of the garden. So they had a sewage system. Okay, this is a good example. This is a Danish collection of the sewage system that was built in Maxima, Rome. Okay, who do you think they got these ideas? They got them from the Garden of Eden, right? It's amazing how it all fits together once you know the thing, right?
When you consider that humans didn't understand germs
Yeah.
till, like he said, the 18th, 19th century, why did they know to get rid of their poop?
Yeah.
It had to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
By the time of Adam's arrival, most of the plants of that section of the world were growing in Eden. Already, many of the fruits, cereals, and nuts been greatly improved. Many modern vegetables and cereals were first cultivated here, but scores of varieties of food plants were subsequently lost to the world.
That's too bad, too.
Mhm. About 5% of the garden is under high artificial cultivation, 15% partially cultivated, the remainder being left in a more or less natural state pending the arrival of Adam, it being thought best to finish the park in accordance with his ideas.
Okay, so they left part of it so that he could use his own, add his own touches to it, right? Because he was a botanist, right?
And so was the Garden of Eden made ready for the reception of the promised Adam and his consort. And this garden would have done honor to a world under perfected administration and normal control. Adam and Eve were well pleased with the general plan of Eden, though they made many changes in the furnishings of their own personal dwelling.
Although the work of embellishment was hardly finished at the time of Adam's arrival, the place was already a gem of botanic beauty, and during the early days of his sojourn in Eden, the whole garden took on a new form and assumed new proportions of beauty and grandeur. Never before this time nor after has Urantia harbored such a beautiful and replete exhibition of horticultural and agriculture. We got an interesting.
The tree of life. In the center of the garden
Hang on.
temple.
Hang on, Millie, for a second. Okay. I'll tell you what I'd like to do, if it's okay with y'all. I think I'd like to end here and finish this off on next time, because I don't believe we'll be able to finish this. Well, we might be able to. What do y'all think?
You can stop if you want.
No, we could
We got what, 4 more sections?
No, the tree of life is 6, and we only have 7, fate of Eden.
Okay, well, let's keep going,
Yeah.
try to
And
finish.
it's only 8:20.
Okay, we're good. Okay, go ahead, Millie.
In the center of the garden temple, Van planted the long-guarded tree of life, whose leaves were for the healing of the nations, and whose fruit had long sustained him on earth. Van well knew that Adam and Eve would also be dependent on this gift of Edentia for their life maintenance after they once appeared on Urantia in material form.
Now remember, the leaves of the tree kept them from aging, right? And it did the same for Van and Amadon before they got here, all right? And this is a figure of a man, they called him a god, and the question is here, is this Van? Yeah, wearing a pointed headdress, and this is the 8th century BC. What Van may have looked like. Very tall. Rodney?
The material sums and the system capitals do not require the tree of life for sustenance. Only in the planetary repersonalization are they dependent on this adjunct to physical immortality.
I guess it regenerates their cells or something.
The tree of the knowledge of good and evil may be a figure of speech, a symbolic designation covering a multitude of human experiences, but the tree of life was not a myth. It was real and for a long time was present on Urantia. When the Most Highs of Edentia approved the commission of Caligastia as planetary prince of Urantia, and those of the 100 Jerusalem citizens as his administrative staff, they sent to the planet by the Melchizedeks a shrub of Edentia, and this plant grew to be the tree of life on Urantia. This form of non-intelligent life is native to the constellation headquarters spheres, being also found on the headquarters worlds of the local and super universes, as well as on the Havona spheres, but not on the system capitals.
Isn't that interesting? So it says here that the Melchizedeks brought a shrub of Edentia, and this shrub grew to be a tree of life. How it got here, we don't know, right? It doesn't say we put it in our spaceship and drove it over here. Yeah.
I wish they would have said something.
I know. All right, let's see if I can get this to the next one. This superplant stored up certain space energies which were antidotal to the aging producing elements of animal existence. The fruit of the tree of life is like a super chemical storage battery, mysteriously releasing the life extension force of the universe when eaten. This force of sustenance was wholly useless to the ordinary evolutionary beings on Urantia, but specifically it was serviceable to the 100 rematerialized members of Caligas's staff and to the 100 modified Andonites, who had contributed their plasm to the prince's staff, and who in return were made possessors of that complement of life which makes it possible for them to utilize the tree of life for an indefinite extension of their otherwise mortal existence. So this is how Amadon stayed alive. Now, interesting also is when Van and Amadon took the tree of life from Dalmatia into the mountains, they did not allow any of the rebel Andonites access to it any longer, right? So they died of old age just like they normally would have. All right?
During the days of the prince's rule, the tree was growing from the earth in the central and circular courtyard of the father's temple. Upon the outbreak of the rebellion, it was regrown from the central core by Van and his associates in their temporary camp. The Studentia shrub was subsequently taken to their highland retreat, where it served both Van and Amadon for more than 150,000 years.
Okay, interesting point here. Notice here it says it was regrown from the central core. What does that mean? From the root, right? Why was it regrown from the root? Because when the barbarians overran Dalmatia during the rebellion, they burnt the tree of life. They tried to eat the leaves and it did nothing for them, so they burned it. So Van took the core, or the root, regrew it in the mountain location. Okay? All these little tidbits are interesting, aren't
Yeah. When Van and his associates made ready to depart plan to leave, they transplanted each tree to Dalmatia. There, once again, people in a circular courtyard of another temple, the father, and had Eve for the opposite, perfected its fruit, cultivate its their dual form of physical life.
So it was regrew in the new garden, right?
When the plans of the material sun went astray, Adam and his family were not permitted to carry the core of the tree away from the garden. When the Nodites invaded Eden, they were told that they would become as gods if they partook of the fruit of the tree. Much to their surprise, they found it unguarded. They ate freely of the fruit for years, but it did nothing for them. They were all material mortals of the realm. They lacked that endowment which acted as a complement to the fruit of the tree. They became enraged at their inability to benefit from the tree of life, and in connection with one of their internal wars, the temple and the tree were both destroyed by fire. Only the stone wall stood until the garden was subsequently submerged. This was the second temple of the Father to perish.
Okay, so that was the fate of the tree of life, right? It was burned. And now must all flesh on Urantia take the natural course of life and death. Adam, Eve, and their children and their children's children, together with their associates, all perished in the course of time, thus becoming subject to the ascension scheme of the local universe, wherein mansion world resurrection follows material death. So they all died of old age eventually.
7, the fate of Eden. Is it mine?
Yes.
After the first garden was vacated by Adam, it was occupied variously by Nodites, Kutatites,
Cuttites,
Cuttites,
and
and
Sunttites.
Suntatites. It later became the dwelling place of the northern Nodites, who opposed cooperation with the Adamites. The peninsula had been overrun by these lower grade Nodites for almost 400,000 years.
4,000 years.
4,000 years after Adam left the garden, when, in connection with the violent activity of the surrounding volcanoes and the submergence of the Sicilian land bridge to Africa, the eastern floor of the Mediterranean Sea sank, carrying down beneath the waters the whole of the endemic peninsula. Concomitant with this vast submergence, the coastline of the eastern Mediterranean was greatly elevated, and this was the end of the most beautiful natural creation that Uraja had ever harbored. The sinking was not sudden, several hundred years being required completely to submerge the entire peninsula.
Does this not describe exactly where we were talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a perfect example. And the volcano, the volcanoes around there helping this happen is along the line of the sinking of Atlantis also, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of interesting. Rodney?
Yes. We cannot regard this disappearance of the garden as being in any way a result of the miscarriage of the divine plans, or as a result of the mistake of Adam and Eve. We do not regard the submergence of Eden as anything but a natural occurrence. But it does seem to us the sinking of the garden was timed to occur at just about the date of the accumulation of the reserves of the violent race for undertaking the work of rehabilitating the world people.
Funny how things work out.
Melchizedek counseled Adam not to initiate the program of racial uplift and blending until his own family had numbered 500,000. It was never intended that the garden should be the permanent home of the Adamites. They were to become emissaries of a new life to all the world. They were to mobilize for unselfish bestowal upon the needy races of earth.
So they were to go out and mix with all humans, right? The instruction given Adam by the Melchizedeks implies that he was to establish racial, continental, and divisional headquarters to be in the charge of his immediate sons and daughters, while he and Eve were to divide their time between the various world capitals as advisors and coordinators of the worldwide ministry of biologic uplift, intellectual advancement, and moral rehabilitation. And this is presented by Salonia, the seraphic voice of the garden. This is the voice that warned Eve that she was fixing to default, right? And next time, we'll do paper 74, Adam and Eve. Let's say a little prayer and we'll quit for tonight. Dear, would you like to pray for us?
Thank you, Heavenly Father, Mother God, for this wonderful revelation. Thank you for filling in all the pieces for us and helping us to understand the locations and the intent of the Garden of Eden. Thank you for the beauty that was brought out and help us to keep it ever in our mind once we visit ourselves visit Adentia. We have so much to look forward to in the future after this life. And we just thank you for comforting us in times of sorrow and concern about the welfare of the earth, that we may keep this into our hearts and minds and help others to also to understand that this is a beautiful place, but there are more beautiful places we will be visiting. It is in your name always, Jesus, that we pray and we give thanks. Your will be done, Father. Amen.
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 Okay, and we will take up the next paper next time, next Monday, same time, same place. We'll be stuff videos.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good night, all.
Good night, Millie.
Millie?
Good night, Millie.
Have a wonderful week, Millie.
Working on it, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Always enjoy reading this.